According to the Kremlin, CIA Director John Ratcliffe engaged in discussions with his intelligence peers in Moscow, marking an unusual and discreet visit amid ongoing tensions with Washington stemming from Russia's conflict in Ukraine. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said Ratcliffe did not have a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. However, Putin was made aware of the discussions that took place, which were categorized as occurring at the level of intelligence agencies. Of course, President Putin is immediately informed of everything, Peskov added, refusing to say what was discussed. US President Donald Trump tried to minimize the importance of Ratcliffe's Moscow journey, saying it was sort of semi-routine. "I hate to disappoint people," he said on conservative broadcaster Glenn Beck's radio show. But occurrences such as Ratcliffe's visit are not an annual event. Since the 1980s, Moscow and Washington have maintained official communication channels to ensure dialogue can occur whenever American or Russian lives are at risk, among other circumstances. In the year 2021, Nikolai Patrushev, who serves as the Secretary of Putin's Security Council, held a meeting with CIA Director William Burns in Moscow, just months ahead of the Russian military's incursion into Ukraine. Subsequently, in November 2022, Burns had another significant encounter with Sergei Naryshkin, the leader of Russia's foreign intelligence agency in Turkey, during which he issued a warning to Russia against the use of nuclear weapons in the conflict involving Ukraine. Following Moscow's extensive invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the relationship between Russia and the United States plummeted to levels reminiscent of the Cold War. However, the dynamics seemed to shift positively with Trump's return to the presidency. He had vowed to quickly resolve the conflict, engaging in numerous phone conversations with Putin and even welcoming him to Alaska just about a year prior. US and European intelligence agencies fear Putin may attempt a limited assault on a NATO member nation in the coming years. Did the CIA chief use his Moscow visit to warn Russia against attacks on NATO allies, in particular the Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania? Here's all you need to know. CIA Director John Ratcliffe allegedly cautioned Russian officials in Moscow against heightening tensions with America's NATO partners, specifically Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. In recent weeks, Russia has made a number of threatening statements directed at NATO nations backing Ukraine, raising concerns that Moscow might escalate its tactics with more aggressive hybrid warfare approaches or undertake limited military actions against its NATO partners. Citing a source familiar with the matter, Politico stated the Moscow meeting was primarily to warn Russia against any escalatory action against the Baltic states. The Wall Street Journal also reported the CIA chief's surprise Moscow trip was to warn Russia not to attack NATO. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, have had cold relations with Russia since they were under the control of Tsarist Russia. After only about 20 years of independence, the Baltic states were involuntarily absorbed into the Soviet Union. NATO likes to describe itself as the most successful alliance in history, not because it won a war, but because during the Cold War, it deterred a Soviet attack on Western Europe and thereby prevented a new world war. As per the Quincy Institute, what is too often forgotten, however, is that war was prevented not just by NATO solidarity, but also by NATO caution. Successive US administrations, fully backed by their European allies, rejected calls for aggressive policies aimed at rolling back Soviet power in Eastern Europe. Since the end of the Cold War, by contrast, NATO has become committed to rolling back Russian power even in former Soviet countries on Russia's own borders. As a result of the clash between this and Moscow's determination to maintain a sphere of influence, think tank analysts say NATO now finds itself in a proxy conflict with Moscow on the European continent itself. Let's now dive into Europe's big Kaliningrad worry. Kaliningrad is a Russian exclave to the west of the Baltics, bordering Lithuania and Poland, both NATO allies. Situated on the shores of the Baltic Sea, Kaliningrad is a Russian island surrounded by NATO and European Union countries. During the Cold War, the region was a heavily fortified Soviet military base, constituting the starting point for any Soviet offensive against NATO. As per the Warsaw Institute, the armed forces stationed in Kaliningrad conduct regular provocations in the basin of the Baltic Sea. Provocative operations are carried out from the region's airports and ports. The Russian fleet regularly approaches or crosses the boundaries of the maritime economic zones of 3 Baltic countries. Similar activities are carried out using air forces. Russian fighters fly with their transponders turned off or fly dangerously close to Baltic airspace, regularly testing NATO's readiness in the eastern Baltic region. Think tank analysts say missile systems deployed in Kaliningrad pose a real challenge to NATO's eastern flank. Rocket forces located in the region and the Baltic Fleet create a special zone that prevents the enemy from entering the theater of military activities and deprives it of the freedom of operation in the region. If this turns into direct war, there is a good chance that it will end with a nuclear exchange. Russia has the largest nuclear arsenal in the world. As the heir to the substantial Soviet missile arsenal, Russia boasts the widest inventory of ballistic and cruise missiles in the world. As per the CSIS missile defense project, Russia remains a major power in the development of missiles of all kinds. Russian strategic rocket forces constitute a significant element of Moscow's military strategy. Russian missiles perform a wide variety of missions, from anti-access, area denial in local conflicts, to delivery of strategic nuclear weapons across continents. Think tank analysts say a significant modernization program continues in Russia, producing new variants of both ballistic and cruise missiles with significant new capabilities. Russia is also making major advancements in the field of precision-guided cruise missiles. Not to forget, Putin also banks on strategic bombers. For decades, long-range bombers have been part of the Soviet and Russian nuclear triad that also includes land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles and atomic-powered submarines carrying intercontinental ballistic missiles. The strategic bombers have flown regular patrols around the globe, showcasing Moscow's nuclear might. The venerable Tu-95 Bear is the only propeller-powered bomber in service. The Tu-95 entered into service with the Soviet Strategic Air Force in 1957. Like the US B-52, Tu-95 Bear has been upgraded and will remain in service into the 2040s. Production restarted in the 1980s. An upgraded Tu-95 aircraft are not as old as the US B-52 planes. A key element of the Russian nuclear triad, the modernized Tu-95 aircraft can carry long-range cruise missiles. 60 world records on Tu-95MC for flight altitude with and without cargo, for flight speed in a closed course, and for the duration of a non-stop flight. The Tupolev Tu-22M is a twin-engine supersonic bomber designed in the 70s that was codenamed Backfire by NATO. It has a shorter range compared with the Tu-95, but during US-Soviet arms control talks in the 70s, Washington insisted on counting them as part of the Soviet strategic nuclear arsenal because of their capability to reach the US if refueled in flight. The latest version of the plane, the Tu-22M3, carries Kh-22 cruise missiles that fly at more than 3 times the speed of sound. The missile was designed by the Soviet Union to strike U.S. aircraft carriers. It packs a big punch, thanks to its supersonic speed and ability to carry 630 kilograms of explosives. The Tu-160 White Swan is the largest supersonic aircraft in the history of military aviation, the heaviest combat aircraft in the world, with the highest maximum takeoff weight among bombers. Tu-160 destroys installations in remote areas and the deep rear of continental theaters. At least 44 world records. A flight for a closed course distance of 1,000 kilometers with a payload of 30 tons was performed at an average speed of 1,720 kilometers per hour. The airplane has a toilet, a galley unit, and a sleeping berth. It is equipped with a probe and drogue type flight refueling system, integrated low-wing configuration aircraft with a variable swept wing, tricycle landing gear, all-flying tailplane, and fin. High-lift devices include slats, double-slotted flaps and spoilers, and flaperons are used for roll control. 4 engines are mounted in pairs in nacelles in the belly. The bomber boasts 2 compartments to accommodate the payload, located in tandem, one after the other. The main materials of the airframe are titanium, heat-treated aluminium alloys, steel alloys, and composite materials.